And we're live.
Hello, all. Welcome to Generational Change Monday Night Live. Hello.
Josh, you are first.
Hi,
welcome.
I'm Jen.
I'm Peter.
I'm going to put on some light. See what I could do here.
The lighting's pretty good here. I actually got that right.
Jason fixed something that he says should help our quality. He said something.
Yeah, apparently we had adjusted the strength of man, the word's like slipping me.
It's
right
okay.
Now.
The bandwidth, the something.
Yeah, the bandwidth was a little weak. It was strong, but it wasn't where it needed to go. So we were not operating at the proper.
Because I found it
power.
ironic that I'm the one up in the mountains and you were having worse quality. So we have a lot to do, right?
We have a lot of storms and all that stuff. So, obviously we want everybody, to hit the like button. I'll put that out there right now. Very important.
And if you're not a Patreon and you would like to be a Patreon, where's my Lulu sticker?
Oh,
if you subscribe until supplies last, you get a Lulu sticker with your other merch. And so we've got some good stuff, guys. So check us out on Patreon. Will you put the thing up? Yeah, there it is.
So Jen is leading with Patreon this evening. That is
I am, because you know what? You got to get it. You got to get it with the most people on.
Well, that's very true too, and
or at least multiple times. But so we have a lot to do. We
definitely do. Obviously, Jesse Philippe will be in here in a few minutes. He is running to flip Florida's 15th congressional district, which is one of the. We have 27 congressional districts in the state of Florida. This is one of, I think, 5 that are actually flippable. So, he's actually running for a seat that actually makes sense.
Where is that? What's his area?
It's the I-4 corridor. It's right between Tampa and Orlando. It's Lakeland. Lakeland is the primary city in this particular district.
Yeah. Okay. Well, cool. So do you want to do anything before that? We have a few minutes. So do you want to start?
Yeah, I think we should address Cuba. I think it's very important because.
Okay. So then, do focus on Florida. And
Well, no, I think that we should just talk for a few minutes. I mean, we'll do focus.
But that's on there. I'm just saying that's on there. Yes, that's why I sent you the slides earlier in the day.
No, I didn't. No, and my apologies. I didn't realize that was. I guess I.
Do you see it?
Yeah, no, I see it. And so I think it's very important that, again, corporate media has its agenda. It has its narrative. They know what they want. And let's face it, I don't really think they give a damn that, Cuba's communist. I mean, we don't support communism. I support a hybrid system. But people have the right to their own destiny. And so at the end of the day, Cuba has been a source of ire for multinational corporations because almost every other island is inhabited by multinational corporations. That's why you have crap in Haiti. That's why you have crap in the Virgin Islands. That's why you have crap in Puerto Rico. Because if it's not adhering to what corporate special interests want, they are going to do whatever they have to do in order to get what they want. And so what no one is talking about, and why most Cubans, not all, but most Cubans are in the streets marching right now, is because of the embargo and because of the sanctions. They want you to believe that this is some anti-communist march that they're doing. Are there anti-communist Cubans? Absolutely, 100%.
That's not who this is, though.
That is not what this
is. These people that we're portraying as they're upset about communism. No, they're not. They're upset about poor and horrible socioeconomic conditions that we are enforcing on them with our embargo. That's the predominant problem that they have with their economic situation. So it's not a communism problem, even though they are a communist state. That's not the problem. The problem is us. We are the problem. We're going to get to talk all about how much of a problem we are with our guest tonight, and I finished it 24-hour and change Audible book.
Yeah, you're definitely going to be carrying this one more than me, that's for sure. Chris, I am going to tell you, as I tell everybody every time we go live, I monitor the channel every day, and I can assure you that people get unsubscribed to our channel all the time. So the fact that you're still subscribed, but the bell wasn't on, is another trick that they do. We recently looked into Rockfin. I'm going to look into it. Rockfin. I can't even say it right. I'm going to look into it again because our message is suppressed. And
Yeah.
when we talk about issues like what's really going on in Cuba, it is going to further suppress our message.
Yeah, that
because
just doesn't help. It's not going to help, but that's not going to change what we do, which is why we really hope some people will do Patreon, because really we're not going to be able to sustain financially and talk about these issues. Just the mention of certain things will get us suppressed.
Jen, you forgot to put one of the important news stories up, and I'm actually a little disappointed in you. You forgot to mention that 2 of the assassins that assassinated the president of Haiti were right here in South Florida. What a surprise.
Yeah. You know what? Because you know what? It just wasn't.
That's to the point where it's like when they say, yeah, you know, the 2 of the assassins were from Florida. You're like, if they weren't from Florida, I would have been more surprised. It's kind of like expectancy at this point.
Well, but I just want people to understand, like, we participated and have done several times in the Hands Off Cuba caravan that takes place at the end of the month, every month down in Miami-Dade. And there is definitely a huge generational divide between the younger generation of Cubans and older Cubans. But it's a fairly mixed on both sides. But I will say this, that the Cubans that would be our people, the people that want to end the embargo, the people that are sick of fighting about ridiculous nonsense and harping on capitalism or on communism, those are the majority now. They are. And the older people, the more holding on to this, anger about communism, they're less frequent and less of them. So I have noticed a change in my lifetime being a native Floridian. It used to be you didn't see anybody on the left, or what we would call the left, on this issue. So the fact that it's switched is, I do consider it progress.
And I do think that while a lot of them are obviously anti-communist, and look, I'm not, I don't support communism. I don't. But if people want to support it, that's their prerogative. That's free will. That's what you have the ability to do.
How about it's just really not our business?
It isn't our business.
It's just not our business.
It is not our business. And unfortunately, there are way too many people here that want you to, but because again,
hi, Declan.
There is just this belief, Declan, you're terrible, dude. There is just there is this belief that they should be able to get away with whatever they want to get away with.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. And that is something that, again, you're only looking at one part of the problem. Is communism partially cause for what's going on? I'm sure it is. But you can't make that determination until you remove the sanctions and the embargo. Right. When you do that, then we can have a conversation about communism. But my goodness, but unfortunately, people are easily fooled. They're easily fooled. And it's probably because we're immersed in this world and most people are not. And that's another mistake that a lot of people make about politics, is this idea, especially on social media, that everybody's concerned about this stuff.
Most people have no clue. Most people have
maybe
no clue.
3 to 5% of the whole population actually
even paying attention.
This stuff.
Yeah.
And that may be a high number.
This is a big deal. I mean, and especially in Florida, obviously we have a massive Cuban population, and I personally feel encouraged that they are rising up on the side that we're on. Like, I feel like there's been progress made. So that's good. We have a few other good Florida stories. Wait, Daniela Levine Cava, was it?
Josh, she has no choice in this matter. This is not an issue that she can win on if she decides.
I'm not sure, because you mean, she was there with the old schoolers?
I'm not sure if she was with the old schoolers, but she's definitely there with Free Cuba. The problem,
she needs to do what she needs. I mean, she's got to do what her constituents want. That's her job. So whatever that is. So there are a couple other really interesting things. Did you read that repealed law that they're talking about regarding the condo collapse?
I am not surprised in the least, but this, of course, gets back to the fact that what ultimately did happen in Surfside is something that, God willing, is not going to happen again, but many more buildings are subject to this type of faulty infrastructure.
But did you read what the law was that was a repealed law? Because you forwarded me this story. So I'm curious.
I glanced at it. I didn't go through it, in full detail. But if you want to share, please tell me. Again, I do remember reading it, and it had something to do with inspection. And I didn't. Forgive me. I'm not fully grasping it at this moment. So if you
No, I was asking you legitimately because you're the one who forwarded me that article. But yeah, I mean, this collapse, as we've said, this is a tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And the real issue is that these associations can't afford to fix the problem. It isn't even that they don't want to, or they're going to bicker about it, although that will happen too. But we're talking, and not just Florida, by the way, this is going to be a United States problem. This is going to be anywhere on the coast is going to have this, and other places will have other issues. But these associations, with all the insurance coverage that they have, they can't afford to fix these issues. This has to be done by the federal government as part of an infrastructure plan, or they're all going to end up washed away to the ocean. So there is no other way for this to be handled. The associations will not have the money it will take to pay for these improvements to fix their buildings. They just won't. So they're going to end up having to abandon these buildings, and then they'll end up being worthless. And so the only way for them to be, for any sort of like real estate market to be staying great, is going to be for a build of the infrastructure. And I'm sorry, people, I worked in this kind of law. These associations will not have the money, nor will they be able to afford, the residents will not be able to afford the assessments. You have people in that building, by the way, in that Surfside building, that had a 1-bedroom, 1-bath unit, and they were being assessed $300,000 for what they were proposing to do. That might be worth more than whatever is left on their mortgage. Like, these people cannot afford the amount of money it will take. That's the bottom line.
Gets back, and we'll talk about this with Jesse in a minute. It's obviously two major components here. The first one, of course, is we are a peninsula, and the majority of the real estate, obviously the overwhelming majority of the real estate that has any value in the state of Florida are on the coastlines. Yeah. And so when you factor in how much erosion is probably there, Surfside obviously being one of the more treacherous places for that, but you can go all the way from Key West all the way up to Destin and all the way back around again to Amelia Island and Jacksonville. There are so many places that are going to have infrastructural problems. Now, obviously, South Florida in general is going to have it the worst, but
we're also going to address that a little bit. We have a story time for you all today. Peter, you're going to read it again, because I like it when you read it without knowing it ahead of time. It's really funny.
I could probably read it in one of the former presidents or current president's voice.
No, I want you to read it with your good radio voice. You're going to read it like it's a story.
So before we bring Jesse in, we just have a couple of more focus on Florida stories. We had a classic Florida story that, of course, Florida man finds mysterious replica hands in the mail. Are they trying to send him a message? I mean, what?
But they were both right
your hands next.
But it's two right hands, and that's the thing. It's not even a right and a left.
The equivalent of 2 left feet? Is that basically what they're suggesting?
The exact opposite of 2 left feet. That's what I mean, I thought that was kind of funky, but it would have been a lot more Florida if they were actual real hands. I'm just saying.
Maybe.
I'm just saying, if they were real hands, I would have been more like, no, that's Florida.
I still think the reason why they actually sent the hands is because they're trying to send them a message. They wouldn't have sent 2 hands with gloves like that. No, this was an accident, but it's just funny. Maybe it's a prank. I mean, who knows?
It's whatever. I think it was an accident.
It's a classic Florida story. That's just how it is.
And then you've got to talk about these people. By the way, do you like my nun? Look how I did my nun.
Perfect. Yeah, seriously. Go get woke, go broke is what they like to say.
So
it's really
Florida's not the only place, but I always love the Post articles about us, like what they focus on always cracks me up.
Yeah, well, it's always so but New York Post is a conservative paper, so it's interesting that they actually put this out there. But it is still it speaks to the greater problem of people with means who think that they have the right to tell people. This is no different. I mean, honestly, guys. I've worked in athletics for the past 2 decades, frankly. It's been a major part of my life. And I can tell you at some of the bigger universities, whether it's the University of Miami down here, whether it's USF or UCF up where Jesse is, you get these very wealthy benefactors of the sports programs, and they think because they give you a lot of money that now all of a sudden they are the ones who get to determine exactly how you operate.
Actually, in a lot of universities, that is how it works. But
that is unfortunately how it works. It shouldn't be that way.
So this story, we have people that are listen only,
The parents who pledged $1.35 million to a Florida Catholic school sue for their money over it going woke.
They're accusing it of being woke. Oh my goodness. And you know what? I'm thinking that this is going in line with anybody that's opposed to whether it's critical race theory or different types of things that they're trying to instill these horrible ideas in our children.
Just, again, it just speaks to the bigger problem that we have when it comes to, money in politics, money in all courses of life. And so for anybody who doesn't think that corporate money in politics doesn't have an impact on how decisions are made and what ultimately ends up happening, the only reason this story made it is because of the fact that they gave a lot of money and thought that their money was going to do the talking. And apparently the school is not just going to go along to get along. And now they want to make it a story. We gave money to answer. And that's what happens in politics. And that's what we're trying to change. And so the gentleman we're about to bring in, Jesse Philippe, who's going to obviously tell us more about himself, he is running with no corporate special interest money. And that is what we look to support. Policy is as important as anything. But first and foremost, how are you being funded? Are you funded by people? And if you are, then it's game on, and we will do anything and everything in our capacity to help. And of course, he is running to flip one of the very few, like I said, we have 27 congressional districts currently in the state of Florida, and this is one of about maybe 5 that are legitimately flippable. And so without further ado, we are welcoming into the studio, Jesse Philippe. Welcome to Generational Change.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you.
It is. I've followed you and I've seen your last campaign, and it was amazing. And I'm just so humble to be here, and I thank you so much.
Absolutely. So talk a little. Well, all right, Peter, you had a plan. Did you have a plan?
Well, yes, Jesse, if you can retweet this on social media. We want to get this out to as many people as possible right now so that everybody can, obviously meet Jesse up close and see what he's all about.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're all about generational change, humanity forward, advancing the message of what we're trying to do, which obviously is dealing heavily with the corporate infrastructure that we have in politics. And certainly in the state of Florida, it is of no exception. The district that you are running in is the Florida's 15th congressional district. It is a +6R, which means that it is just outside the margin of error, but it does mean that it is a flippable district if all things come together. So tell us, we don't need to talk much about your opponent. Obviously, we can discuss him, but what's most important is that people obviously know more about you, what you're fighting for, and how people can obviously help you out that are in, who obviously share your values and certainly want to help a non-corporate candidate be as successful as possible.
Of course. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate that. Our campaign has really been focused on, since day one, on how we get the community back into Congress. That's the most important thing to us. And the community is, the person going to work from 8 to 5. Right now, our politics is very dirty, with a lot of dirty money coming from big corporations, influencing the decisions of our congressmen and influencing decisions that don't act in the self-interest of the people that they actually serve. And so one of the things that, inspired me to get into politics is a conversation I had. I used to work in corporate America, so I understand how it works. And I had a conversation with one of our customers, I believe, one time, and she stated that she couldn't afford our services because of her, she only received so much amount of money in Social Security. And what happened was, in that conversation with her, she literally cried and told me, look, all I have is this little amount of money that's given to me by the government, and I have no idea what to do, but I need your services. long story short, we made it work. We got her the services that she needed. But that touched me ever since that conversation. Because I look at all the spending that we do in the United States government. We spend, like I said, more money in the military, 10 times more than every other country. But yet we are sitting there having a debate in the Supreme Court in our, congressional halls about, do we have enough to provide Medicare for all for everyone? And we're literally spending almost $780 million in military spending. It's probably in the billions at this point. For me, it's always going to be about how do we get this community going. District 15 is a unique district. We have a mix of farmers. We have a mix of city life, which is a Brandon, Tampa. You have Lakeland in our district. And we are the symbolism of what America is right now. A country that is trying to find its way and help the middle class. Because I feel like we haven't helped the middle class in a very long time. Our middle class strategy has been obsolete in the last 50, 60 years. And it's been really focused on how do we get how the rich continue to keep their money and, accumulate their wealth, and how the big corporations continue to keep their money and accumulate their wealth. And it's been very little about how do we get people into that middle class, and how we get people to ascend above the middle class. And so that's our campaign. It's been focused on how we do that. We have policies on our website that literally dives deep into what we believe, what policies that we believe can actually help engage conversation and engage people back into the workforce, engage people back to the middle class. And, and that's kind of who I am. A little personal thing. I'm a United States Marine. I served 6 years. So when I speak of military service, I've been there. And so I'm not just talking just based on, just
right.
to talk.
What do you get a sense from, when you're out talking to people in your district? Like, what are you getting a sense right now? Because now we're about almost a year from us really campaigning. So, and that's been a year of harsh COVID reality for a lot of people economically. To us, and when you talk about, somebody for workers and standing up for middle class, we don't have a labor party. And so that's the primary problem. But what are you finding out there that is the key issues that people are talking about that matter to them?
The key issue is always going to be, in my district, everyone wants healthcare. It's important. Healthcare is a right. So we believe in Medicare for all. I believe most people are okay with that, that policy stance. Another big issue is affordable housing. That's always going to be an issue, especially with our communities. We've grown so fast in the I-4 corridor, and the housing market has gone insanely high. Apartments are $1,600, and we're just trying to fight for $15 minimum wage. So it's going to be affordable housing. It's going to be Medicare for all. It's going to be, the last big one that I noticed is infrastructure. That's a big deal for our district. We have potholes that needs to be filled. We have kids that during COVID wasn't able to get internet access because, they live in a rural community and there was no internet provided to them. So they were behind in school. So those are the things that we're going to need in our district. And those are the things that we're campaigning on.
Are you finding, well, I was just going to ask him about their local, like the party and stuff like that. What did you have, Peter? Like, what were you going to get in on?
Well, I do think, and you could do, I'll remember what I was going to ask. You go first.
Well, I was just wondering like how you're finding it in your district in terms of support and what the party is doing to you. Are they supportive of you since it's a flip district? You're not challenging a Democratic incumbent. I mean, what's the vibe like there in terms of support for you?
On this cycle, last cycle was a little bit harder because it was 3 people in the race, and this cycle it's kind of early because of redistricting. We've gotten some support from the party, but this support is kind of like string support because they're waiting to redistricting to kick in to determine if they're going to go all in or not.
Right.
And I understand that. But
they don't work against you.
No, well, I mean, I don't. no one's ever said not to run. And I've never had that.
Okay, that's a good step. That's a good step.
But you know, I mean, Jen, you've been a part of this. You know, when you're trying to make some meaningful changes for the middle class, you find that a lot of people in power, you know, like small increment changes and not big bold changes.
Yeah.
They just want to kind of go through the ebb and flow of things. And when you're talking about shaking things up, you know, you get a lot of pushback because people don't want that, and that's what we actually need.
Yeah. Peter, where were you going?
Jesse, I think one of the reasons why, and I know a lot of people don't like hearing this, but one of the reasons that I do think DeSantis is going to be very formidable in the next few years is because of his military service.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how much of an impact that has when you speak to voters in a red-leaning district, even if it's not a fully, you know, it's not a blood red district, let's be honest, but it leans red. And so, you know, certainly, you know, with Lakeland, you know, I am curious.
What's the district? Somebody's asking, what is your district?
I put it up there at District 15.
They want to know what that encompasses.
It's literally sandwiched in between Tampa Bay and Orlando. So
are you Pasco? They're asking if it's Pasco?
No,
Lakeland is the primary city.
Okay.
And it's on the I-4 corridor. So it's an I-4 corridor district is probably the best way that I would describe it. And if I'm wrong, Jesse, please correct me.
No, that's right. I mean, the far north we go is Lake County. Sure. And we don't go up to, I think you said Manatee County, or we stop. The farthest north we go is Lake County. The farthest south we go is going to be Bartow, Florida.
Sure.
And farthest west that we go is to Temple Terrace, which is right next to Brandon.
Which is right at Tampa, yeah.
Right at Tampa, and the farthest east we go is going to be in Lakeland, Combie Road.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, there's definitely a lot to cover there, and I am curious. You know, does that have an impact? I still think that it's somewhat of a lost appreciation in politics. People really do appreciate those who have served our country.
Yeah, it was important to me to continue to do service. I mean, for me, you know, when I got out of the Marine Corps, that's the hardest thing. If you talk to a lot of military people, to do to continue to serve. You know, most people, you know, go back to school. Most people become police officers and fire rescue, because you never lose that sense of calling to serve. For me, I decided to go a different route. I decided to go get my education, and I went to law school. And right out of law school, I decided to run. So,
where'd you go?
I went to Western Michigan.
Oh, okay, cool. That's a little chilly.
That's pretty close.
That's a little chilly.
No, we have a Florida campus, so I did it in the Sunshine State.
Oh, okay. Because I'm looking at you, and I thought I saw something about you're from Plant City. Is that correct?
I am from Riverview, my geographical area.
Okay.
It's kind of weird in our area. It's like Brandon, Riverview is all kind of mushed together with Gibson.
I don't know why something came up where I sort of affiliated you with Plant City, which I think is funny because I used to say, I don't know who lives there. It's this little stop in between two cities. Like nobody lives in Plant City. It's like I used to make fun of that in my mind. Like it's Plant City, and then I thought you were from there.
No, Plant City is it's in my district. It's a very close community because it's a lot of farmers. Traditional farmers are there, but it's coming up. It's becoming more progressive. They're trying to do things in the city. It's normally deep red, but there's some things happening in Plant City. So just looking forward to it.
Have you noticed that a lot of people are resonating with this message of, and the thing that we really harp on is this idea that you need to be able to build a non-corporate, non-partisan movement around working people. And that is something that I think goes a very long way. And it is an advantage, especially in the district you're running in, because you are able to court independent voters. One of the obvious downsides that we do have in politics is that it is closed primaries, and it is a lot more difficult to get that vote out. So I'm curious what that experience has been like, speaking with independents in particular.
I find that independents for us, our campaign, they loved us. Actually, they loved us so much we wanted to get them to become a Democrat, but they were like, "No, we're not going to switch parties," And that's kind of the sucky thing about having a closed primary state is you have these people who are 100% on board with your agenda, but they can't vote for your agenda because they're not, a registered Democrat. In our district, we're hit with that, especially because our district split a third, and a third. So a third of our district is independents, but a third of it is Democrats. And a lot of the Democrats that in our district tend to be more conservative Democrats. They're not progressive per se. They're progressives. They're progressives on certain things, but for the most part, they have very conservative kind of values. And that's the conversation that we had last campaign with the Democrats in our district. And I mean, we did well. Like I said, we got 14,000 votes, and I think we were able to. I think both our candidates that I was running against both raised $1 million apiece, and we were only able to raise, grassroots. I think we raised about $10,000, $15,000 grassroots, and we got 14,000 votes.
Right.
So that tells you that people care about their message. They care about what you say. It's not about always raising money. It's just about having a message that actually addresses the needs for the middle class.
Yeah.
I think that that's something that, we are going to continue to talk about as we go forward.
Let's get his info up.
Yeah, it's very much about building this collective coalition. Obviously, you're running in a part of the state that you're probably familiar with, Alan Ellison. We think very highly of him. He is running for the U.S. Senate. Cindy Benai, who's out there, who ran for Congress in the 19th district. There are some really good people who are trying to help, as a collective, build this coalition where we can be formidable without the corporate special interest money. And this is one of many steps that needs to be taken. But that's why we have this conversation now, so that momentum can be built going into, assuming there is a primary, and then ultimately the general election. So Jesse, what is your website so that people can find you, that they can get involved and obviously lend a hand with your campaign?
Yeah. So our website is jessephilippe.com. It's JESSEPHILIPPE.com. Obviously, it's on the screen there. Yep. And you just put .com after it, and that you can go there. You can donate. We also have a suggestion box where you can put suggestions of policy platforms, because we have a list of our platforms on the website, so you can actually see what we plan on doing when we get elected. And so we always, love to have people's opinions.
Thank you so much for coming on. It was so nice to meet you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And Jen, keep doing what you're doing. Your campaigns. Oh man, I was so impressed. And I'm gonna follow you guys. Generational change. Great. We can definitely be the change for this Florida and turn it blue.
Thank you.
We will definitely have you back, Jesse. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
You too. I think the more that we keep doing what we're doing in regards to, like I said, bringing everyone together in a way that they actually feel like this is, because again, I think the future does belong to us. I do.
Well, and now we're going to get to have this whole good trip to the past. And I actually have ever.
How did we get here?
This is a very exciting thing for me, because for like the past 25 hours, not continuously, but I have been listening to our next guest, because I do Audible. So I've been listening to this like private lecture from him, which has been really cool. And I've had this thought that I think people need to get rehistory certified like every 10 years. It's really this thing. Like, I mean, I think Zinn should be required reading in high school. But even with that, there's so many little things here and there. And I really loved this. It was very cool. I tried to share it with you, but I couldn't. It won't let me do an Audible. I can't figure out how to do it. So it is what it is. But I'll loan you my tablet and you could listen sometime.
Well, that would be fine, and obviously,
you can buy one.
Well, I think bringing Danny on right now, it couldn't have come at a better time, honestly. Because
I'm going to ask you. I want you to try to pronounce his last name, because I think I can, but I want to see if you can do it.
Sjursen.
Sjursen. He's going to come on. Bring him on. I'm going to ask, because I've been sort of working that.
All right, Danny, I've mangled your name, or did Jen mangle your name? Who said it right? Who didn't say it right? Let us know.
Well, you guys were way closer than my kindergarten teacher and pretty much everybody since. The J is like kind of silent. Yeah, like it's usually Sjursen or Sjursen. Sjursen is how my family pronounces it, but like I think that's like a New Yorkified version of the Norwegian. So that's how we say it. The J is basically silent. But I answer any conglomeration of consonants.
Thank you so much for coming on. I saw you talking to RJ Eskow, also a friend, and so then I did the Audible and I finished, and I got to say, you know, I'm really good up until the things that happened in my lifetime, and then I feel like, yeah, I didn't like it so much the first time. I kind of I don't want to be reminded of Bill Clinton, but this is so important, and this concept that I feel like you really are really working toward is that how we keep redoing the same things over and over and over and not learning from our mistakes. And I love the way you broke it down into eras, because I think that helps people understand. So this is sort of like the three main eras of imperialism that you talked about. And I just, you know, I guess we could start with that, like just sort of break it down, like what this is really focusing on. I mean, obviously we can't go through all of it. It's extremely vast. People, you should get it. Look, I'm going to hold it up because I'm an Audible person. So this is, I don't have real books, but, and I really only like it when it's the author reading it, because then it's like a private lecture. But if you would talk about that, like the general, like, I guess, time frame, if you will, break like of imperialism, how that works.
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on and talking about this. Why write another history of the United States? I mean, there's been a million. You mentioned Howard Zinn. You know, this book doesn't try to do Howard Zinn over. You know, I mean, Howard Zinn, what his amazing accomplishment was like flipping, like inverting the way history is told. Yeah. So it's history from the bottom up. A lot of, you know, first of all, it's a masterpiece, Zinn's book, but yeah, you know, in the process of doing that, what was lost and purposefully lost was the standard like narrative, like the standard sequence. And I had this idea, right, which is probably like a wildly self-righteous ambition, that to sort of maintain the periodization that people are familiar with, but then make it confusing and a bit strange. And so, you know, Zinn up sort of the standard sequence.
I thought it was great. And I actually think that it reminded me a little bit of Zinn in a lot of ways, but it had a much more pragmatic, in terms of how, like, being able to connect what was happening then with what we're still doing now. Like there was, I really felt like it was, his book is a lot more, like you said, it's like a theoretical masterpiece, like a not a theoret, but like, this whole thing, like a whole series of things. And this is much more practical, I think. Like I really saw it as much more like dealing with the day-to-day stuff of these administrations. And some of it was surprising, and some of it, and none of it is good. And so that's my next question for you is, at what point in history have there ever been somebody in that position in the executive branch? I mean, that's predominantly what this kind of really focuses on, that was doing the right thing. Because I was a holdout for Carter for years, and then Margaret Kimberly shot that to shit when we had her on. So, you know, I'm a loss. Anything that stands out as positive?
Well, I mean, part of the idea of the book was to highlight, you know, obviously I'm gonna poke holes in some of the standard narratives and take shots at some of the myths. I mean, American exceptionalism is the target in many ways, you know. I mean, I see American exceptionalism as sort of like a disease. If a person says they're exceptional, then we give them like a diagnosis and maybe a straitjacket. If a country says that they're exceptional, then I guess that's just American patriotism, right? But one of the things we're trying to highlight is that there's these dissenting voices. Sometimes they're like labor activists, or, you know, kind of like street activist people, anti-war people, but sometimes they're prominent folks. And so, you know, I think that some of the people that stand out that are not perfect but have their moment in the sun in the executive branch are John Quincy Adams, you know, an imperfect president, but who, you know, makes certain moves against slavery and then goes into the House of Representatives, this big anti-war guy. I tell stories about Abraham Lincoln, the anti-war activist who starts his career in Congress as an anti-war activist. And it's funny because we don't teach that, do we? Right? Like most Americans don't learn. You know, the Mexican-American War is our first regime change war. I mean, it makes Libya and it's like Libya and Iraq, but almost worse. I mean, it's so overt. And who knew that a bunch of ex and future presidents build their careers as anti-war dissenters publicly against that war? Abraham Lincoln, John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, who runs for president. He's like the Hillary Clinton of his time, right? He runs for president a million times. So I try to highlight some of these stories. Oftentimes the president's best moment isn't what we remember him for.
Okay, so someone's saying they want to hear the three eras. So yeah, we got off track. Sometimes I do. I'm sorry. So would you go through that, because it really the point of this book is really about imperialism. That's really what I mean. That's sort of like the string theme through it. So if you would talk about that.
You know, I taught this at West Point to future imperialists. I mean, you know, to future cadets who are going to go live out the foreign policy of the United States. So it felt obscene not to say this. I guess one of my main arguments is the United States was once, always, ever, and still an empire. That is a challenge to the normal narrative, which says either, no, we're not an empire at all because we were formed in opposition to an empire, or we kind of became an empire for a little bit when we took over the Philippines, but that only lasted a while. I argue that, in fact, we've always been an empire even before we become, you know, the American Republic or colonists. Phase one is settler colonial imperialism. Displace the natives, use the, you know, not contract, but racialized slave labor to build the country.
And this is what era? What time frame are we in when you're talking like this first time?
So settler colonial empire, I'm talking, you know, 1607, first permanent settlement at Jamestown through about 1897. And we don't think of that as empire, even though the founders used the word. Thomas Jefferson said, we're going to be an empire of liberty, right? And all of these things. George Washington used the word empire. This is conquering Mexico. This is conquering Native American lands. This is buying and selling and stealing. In 1898, we've reached the coast, right? The continental United States is conquered, and it's being settled. And now we go overseas, and we do what the Europeans do. And this is kind of phase two when we go maritime, and it looks kind of like European empire. And this is like 1898 till about World War II. This is Spanish-American War, seized the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico. Many of these places are still territories.
Colonies? They're still colonies because we're still colonizing. Yes.
They don't vote for president, but they pay taxes and can be drafted in the army. And they actually, so you know, the top recruiting stations for a long time, some of the top few recruiting stations across the entire United States and territories are in like Guam, you know, and territories like this that can't vote for president. So that's pretty overt imperialism. That's what Americans think of as European imperialism. And then I argue that since World War II, this is the hegemonic imperialism of bases, expeditionary and economic. We are the only country in history to put 800 bases in 80 countries. And to, you know, we're waging war at Roman Empire levels right now. We just don't think of it that way, meaning that across the boundaries of that empire of bases, American soldiers are either actively killing, advising killing, or are tech savvy or proxy forces are. And this really goes from Morocco, you know, West Africa to Central Asia at the very least. The point is, I'm trying to say that there's a long thread of American imperialism, and just because it doesn't always look like what we imagine the British doing in India doesn't mean it's not true. One last point on that. The first phase of American empire, where we go from one coast to the other, settler colonizing, looks a lot like what Russia did. They just went in the opposite direction. I can't help but wonder if we're like so similar that we can't get along like two siblings.
Yeah. I mean, you know, none of this was surprising to me. I mean, over the past 20 years, I'd say I've gotten an earful on stuff that undid all the, it's like we learn lore and mythology in school. And I'm hopeful that that is somewhat changing. I do know teachers that it's not the same. They don't learn the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria anymore. I think they are learning a little bit better. But I'm almost watching it in live time. I'm wondering if you notice this, like when we whitewash the news, when we don't cover certain things, when we censor people, all of those things is what's creating the wrong narrative that 100 years from now, those people won't have an accurate accounting. So I really see this big connection between like the history, teaching it accurately, and censorship, and a lot of the issues that we're having now. I mean, do you think of that as well?
You know, there's like the cliche that, you know, journalism is the first draft of history. There's some truth in that, but and this has always been the case, but there's a lot of problems with it now. When that first draft of history is suppressed or, you know, kind of altered, or it's run by sort of a corporate media that only tells certain stories and focuses here or there, which is a discipline unto itself. You don't always have to put writers in jail to suppress them. You just don't let them on your show or publish them. That's particularly problematic. This book, as you mentioned, does have an eye to the present. It's not some academic exercise. I mean, the idea is to bridge public and private history. I mentioned present events, even in chapters from like the 16 and 1700s. It has an eye on that. One of the things that struck me about my cadets, and I saw this in Iraq and Afghanistan, is their sense of modern history, even things that happened in their parents' lifetime or their own, is very much absent backstory, context, and contrast. And so I tried to just back up and link some of these things together. But we've seen what happens when we don't pay attention to our history, either of our own country or the places that we're going to go invade, because, you know, the Iraq War, for example, has a 40, 50, 60-year backstory. And yet it's put into place by a president who doesn't know the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslims. I mean, actually,
I'm sorry, I laugh out of it. It's just, it's ludicrous.
How have we forgotten that, like, George W. Bush was like, I just want to say it, I'm like, Donald Trump was horrifying, but George W. Bush was responsible for like millions of deaths and the like generational destabilization of the Middle East.
He's a war criminal. He's a war criminal, and his entire administration should have been tried for war crimes. That's what I think.
The best headline I saw after Donald Rumsfeld died, I can't remember what, maybe it was in the Daily Beast. It was like, Donald Rumsfeld, killer of, 300,000 people, dies peacefully. It was just like a perfect description.
We had Ray McGovern on last week, and we touched on that. Yeah, we touched on that a little bit. Rumsfeld, not a favorite. So this is more just like throughout what you were researching and whatever, what did you find to be the most particularly like nefarious that we've really seen in terms of like presidential actions, things that you would just think that's just off the charts? What's the worst?
I mean, this is difficult. I will say the secrecy and the lying that threads through, and just like two examples. I found that most presidential administrations, they want to do two things. They want to gather more power that they're taking from Congress and therefore the people, and putting it in Article 2 rather than Article 1, right? Putting it in the Oval Office. That's the first thing they want to do. And the second thing they want to do is they want to keep you in the dark. They want to keep people in the dark so they can continue to just do what they want. Because it's really messy to have to go to Congress and like deal with public opinion. Better to just do the imperialism or do the stealing of the money from the poor and redistributing it up to the top without people knowing. Two great examples of this. James K. Polk, I always go back to the Mexican-American War, literally sends the army over an internationally recognized border into Mexican territory, or what the international law considered to be Mexican territory. When American troops are attacked and killed by Mexican cavalry, he goes in front of the Congress and lies to the American people. And we know he lied because we know his correspondence that he knew it was a lie. He said American blood was spilled on American soil. And Abraham Lincoln, 2 years later, when he gets elected to Congress, his first speech ever given on the floor, after he was told, you will not get reelected if you say this, and he didn't, he said, it was a lie from front to back. And he calls out James K. Polk. Here's another one, though. Richard Nixon. Let's not let this guy off the hook, right? Before he's president, when he's president-elect, Johnson decides not to run for president again over the whole Vietnam, just madness. He's working on peace talks in Paris. And he's trying to cajole the South Vietnamese government, sounds a lot like what's going on in Afghanistan, to deal with the insurgents, like to deal with North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. And there's some progress being made. And Richard Nixon, this is essentially treason, sends Kissinger over to Paris and says, tell the South Vietnamese that if they hold out and refuse to make a deal, like crazy Nixon's coming in, they'll get a better deal with me. Subverting a peace process. And what do we know happens? 20,000 more American soldiers die in a war that could have and should have ended earlier, and then about 1 million more Vietnamese. And that is rank treason, lying, secrecy, and that really jumped out at me.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, in recent years, I go right to Dick Cheney. I can't get out of that. But one of the things that you talked about that really struck me, and I think just because it's recent history and we all just lived through it with President Obama, is that why this was so exceptionally disappointing. It's not that he was particularly the most nefarious. It's not that he was particularly, the worst. But you made this point that I thought was really true, is given his education and his background, he was so much more knowing of what he was doing than, say, W or Trump or, any of these buffoons. And that it makes it more of a betrayal. And yet, if you mention that to a Democrat, you're canceled. You're not allowed to say anything negative about Obama. But since I think a lot of people on here, obviously, it's recent, if you would talk a little bit about what that was that he was doing in terms of constitutional violations that a constitutional lawyer would know he was doing.
So just a bit of personal backstory, I don't think is in the book.
Yeah.
I was in Iraq and against the war in 2007. And so when the Obama campaign is heating up, and when he was going up against Hillary Clinton, I was on the Obama train because he was really the only candidate that had spoken against the war at the time. And I hadn't, actually. That was my crime, was I kind of went along with it. But I was so desperate to end this war that was literally killing my soldiers at the time. I said, I'm going for this Obama guy, and I did my research. Then when I got back in 2008, I was stationed at Fort Knox because I've been promoted to captain, and I was canvassing for the Obama campaign secretly on the weekends in southern Indiana, right? I would jump the border. So I was on, I really had a feeling for this person.
Yeah.
So there was a certain level of disappointment. The three things that most upset me about the Obama administration, all of which I think he should have known better. The two that maybe he didn't as much know better but ought to have were surging in Afghanistan, letting the generals kind of pressure him into a surge that he was not so sure about, telling us this was the good war, the one we could win. I think in the face of evidence that it wasn't true, and Joe Biden, of course, was the one who was right. I mean, he was the most anti-Afghan war in the group. That bears noting. And I've been a critic of Biden's tenure. He was good on Afghanistan. The Libya regime change, which he admitted, and I'll give Obama that. He said, it was an SHIT show, and it was the biggest mistake of his administration to overthrow Gaddafi and cause the chaos that now has destabilized Africa. But the real one that bothered me, those did too. He's a constitutional law professor, and yet he uses the Espionage Act, which is an archaic, ludicrous absurdity from World War I, used to suppress anti-war, journalists during the First World War. He uses that act to deal with leakers and whistleblowers more times than all the presidents before him combined. And I just know that if he was in his classroom looking at himself Ghost of Christmas Past style, he would be criticizing those very actions as, extra constitutional and at the very least dubious. Yeah. And I think it set a really bad precedent, because then when Trump comes in, what does Trump do? He says, I'll one up you and I'll start actually indicting and charging publishers and taking it a step further than the Obama administration was willing. So he kind of opened the door to that. Boy, would I like to have a conversation with him and say, I know you know better, just admit it to me. But he's so disciplined in his narrative. I don't think he ever would.
Yeah. And now, thanks to, the Trump, he's looking even better. If you think about it, Obama is sandwiched between W and Trump. It's almost like he's just saved from that alone. It's those people are so extreme in what they've done that he just sort of comes off looking like someone, moderate in the middle.
I think Obama had a huge advantage because he was our first true celebrity president. I mean, you can make the argument for Reagan or Clinton, but at the end of the day, he really took advantage of corporate media basically having his back, with the exception of obviously, Fox News and, conservative radio. I mean, Obama had everybody, and he really couldn't do anything wrong. And that, I think, gave him a lot of cover for a lot of the wars that ultimately were started. One thing we do like to talk about, obviously that's why we have a podcast, is to be able to look so that they do have a different perspective than what is being fed to them through corporate special interest television, because that's what it is. So if you could talk about the impact that corporate media ultimately has, especially when it comes to foreign policy and war, I still don't think people truly understand what an impact it has.
They don't understand what manufacturing consent really looks like.
Yeah.
Well, media manufactures consent on behalf of the manufacturers of war material, meaning the military-industrial complex and the war industry. The war in Vietnam appears absurd in the rearview mirror unless you built the weapons for that war that we were involved in from 1959 to 1975. The war in Afghanistan seems utterly absurd and hopeless, and what a waste, unless you work for Raytheon. Of course, if you work for Raytheon, there is a very good chance that you're going to get a talking head analyst spot on either MSNBC or Fox, because war is the last or one of the last truly bipartisan enterprises, is it not? I mean, there are very few issues where a Republican and a Democrat who agree on nothing else will stand up and say, we can't leave Afghanistan. I mean, we have people who call themselves left-end liberal Democrats who basically are like, I don't know, we probably have to stay for this reason. And they give different reasons. The Republicans speak a little more old school imperialist. I mean, at least one of the things I like about the Republicans is they'll tell you they hate you, you know. They'll tell you, they're like, well, I don't really like these brown folks in Afghanistan. I mean, it probably needs some bombing. Whereas most of the time the Democrats will say, well, it's women's rights, we have to look tough, or credibility. But if you were a general and then you go through the revolving door once or twice and you go work for Raytheon, you can be Secretary of Defense. Currently, we have that. Jim Mattis also did the same thing. You could be a congressman. You could be an elite analyst on MSNBC. And you're going to give kind of hawkish views. The thing about media is it has become ever more corporatized. Now, media was always problematic. This idea that it's only been bad now and campaigns only got dirty when Donald Trump came around or when there was TV isn't exactly.
People think that. Please correct that.
Well, I mean, in 1800, which was one of the most contested elections, John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson, the media, which was...
That was the first mudslinging election.
Oh, it was crazy. They said that, John Adams.
He's a hermaphrodite. Thomas Jefferson said that John Adams is a hermaphrodite. I remember that.
The streets will run with blood if Thomas Jefferson is president, and babies will end up on pitchforks. That's literally in newspapers, which was the tweets of the day. This stuff was going viral. It's always been bad, but I think that one of the things that the current media has done is it's more Orwellian in a sense. I mean, it hits you 360. Your phone knows what you're doing. It touches you on both TV and then, of course, social media. It's everywhere. But I do think that on foreign policy, the mainstream media is generally in the tank for more war. One of the ways you know this, and just one anecdotal example for Afghanistan, is that the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the Washington Post's editorial board and Rachel Maddow all argued essentially that we have to continue the war in Afghanistan at one time or another. These people do not sit in the same room on any other issue or very many other issues besides war. And it raises serious questions about why. It's not just economic determinism. There's a degree of cultural patriotism, the Democrats being afraid to look weak, but you have to follow the money on the military-industrial complex to understand the American penchant for militarism. And of course, it was a Republican president who today would be like a left Democrat almost, Dwight Eisenhower, who in his farewell address coins the term military-industrial complex and warns us about it.
It's one of the 5 most important speeches a president's ever made, as far as I'm concerned. There are plenty you can draw from. Look, I think that the speech that Kennedy gave at the commencement in American University in June of '63 is what got him killed. I still think that's what got him killed. And when you start talking like that, it's like, we are an empire, and to deny it is just naivety. And I am kind of curious, maybe it's just the privilege that a lot of suburbanite and big city liberals have when it comes to, the acceptance of these, of the war machine, so to speak. A lot of conservatives just get caught up in the whole, American exceptionalism trope, and it's a very dangerous one. But I don't know if it has the same hold that it used to have. Nevertheless, from your experience, and this is one of the biggest issues that I have, is I really cannot tolerate people who will not serve our country, stand on a front line, and be willing to die for what they believe in think that they have the right to tell other people that you should go die for this country. I have a very big problem with that. I always have.
I think the lowest form of human behavior, as far as I can tell, is somebody who not only avoided wartime service when they had the wonderful opportunity. One thing I'll tell folks, perhaps it's obvious, is that in every single American war, they were never really turning away volunteers. They certainly weren't for the Iraq and Afghan wars. They certainly weren't for the Vietnam War. The lowest form of human behavior is the Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld behavior. And now, not the only ones. There are plenty of Democrats who do this, which is as many deferments as I can get. Now, Rumsfeld had served to some extent. Cheney was like 7 deferments. Bush, find a way into the National Guard. But it's in the think tanks today, too, left center and right center. The lowest form of human behavior is I'm not going to serve when my number comes up. I'm certainly not going to choose to. And my kids aren't even going to consider it. I'm going to shield them in every way. And then I'm going to be the loudest chicken hawks, we call them, chicken hawk voice for war, whether on the floors of Congress, talking heads in the media, or in the Oval Office, pushing for more war. I mean, if you believe it in a war, go fight it. If you believe in a war, send your kids to it. And to me, that just seems like the simplest thing. And oh, by the way, Tim O'Brien, one of my favorite war authors of the Vietnam War, he's been called a war writer, but he said we should actually change the term war to people killing and just insert that into everything, right? And I think that we really need to reframe what this is. And my goodness, in a different time, as in World War II, there are only 30 less Harvard graduates died than West Point graduates. We're talking 300 plus. How many in the War on Terror? It's a number between 0 and 1. And this is upsetting to me. Not because I want more war. I actually want there to be no veterans, so we don't even have to have a Veterans Day anymore. It'd be great if we just gave up that concept and talked about peace, which is a radical act, by the way, to say the word peace anymore. People think you're naive and silly. Meanwhile, it's the most rational thing. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about that. I get fired up about that kind of behavior. Advocating for wars you wouldn't dream of serving in yourself, and you would make sure your kids were shielded from in de facto and de jure ways every time. But someone else, they should go die for your pet ideology.
And that's the interesting thing about Kennedy, going back to Jack, is the fact that he did serve in the Pacific, and his instinct was not to go to war. His instinct was, no, this is not the answer. I can assure you it isn't. I lived it. I read, his the most famous book about his assassination, why he died and why it matters. And, just reading about the portion where, he talks about where they talked about him floating in the Pacific and thinking that he was going to die. And, you can never imagine that it would have evolved and what it evolved into. And then you think about everybody after the fact. You think about, LBJ and Nixon. And then, of course, you do have a president who wasn't looking for an itchy trigger finger in Carter. And then you get Reagan. Look, it's a never-ending cluster for
That's
the
the point.
Conflict. And that's the thing that I think people really need to understand. And that's the thing that I found so disturbing, is that even though a lot of what Trump said during his presidency was BS, he was pretty consistent about saying that war is totally terrible. We don't need to go to war. There's no point in war. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? Even if he's full of it, he is saying it to over half the country that think he's a god. And they're going to basically take it and say, yeah, war is stupid. We don't need to go to war. Yet if he was saying, we totally got to kill the people, we got to kill all those people, and his followers would have walked right over the edge right with him and said, yeah, we got to kill everybody. That's what we got to do. And so it is kind of scary.
But see, I think we're still doing it. We're just not killing as many of our people. We're just killing other people by drone bombing them. And therefore, there's no body bags and nobody sees it. And that's why no one in this country cares, because it's not affecting them and they don't see it. I think if we had on the ground coverage of what was going on in places like Yemen all the time, 24/7, people living in rubble, that fearing for their lives as drones fly over, people would know. I mean, we don't cover that. That's purposefully being not covered.
Look, what changed the Vietnam War right after the Tet Offensive was showing the body bags. they showed the coffins with the American flag draped over it, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
And at that point, it became real, and they're like, "Oh, wow."
Well, that's the thing. I think that's why I think everybody should have to get like rehistory certified, like every 10 years. We should have some.
No, I mean, honestly, look, maybe it's just because of the way that, my grandfather instilled his values in me. I would implement the draft. I just would.
I would start with Congress's family. If you want to start a draft, that's fine. Then I want their kids and grandkids should need to be the first people called. And if then they're willing to do it, then that's fine by me.
Yeah, listen, Abraham Lincoln had his son serve. So as far as I'm concerned, if you really believe in what you're fighting for, and, let's face it, there was a lot of justification to the Civil War. If you are that adamant that we need to be in the Middle East and trying to start a war in Syria or continue what is going on, if you believe so heavily that Russia is a mortal enemy, if China's a mortal enemy, hey, listen, we keep at it, we might blow up the whole world. So it's, it's only a question of, who's going to get pissed off at the wrong time and then just take it way too far. But I really think the area that we need to go to, which I still think is the biggest problem that we have, is obviously the military industrial complex from the standpoint of the weapons manufacturers. They are probably as powerful as anyone on Capitol Hill, at least in terms of foreign policy. I have a friend who was a lieutenant who served in Iraq, in Baghdad. And, I remember reading about a story about how one contractor got $25 million to build a gas station in Baghdad. And I'm thinking, what's he spending? $500,000 on the gas station and pocketing the other $24.5 million? I mean, the scam that defense contractors are running on our country is something that, again, we support the troops 1,000%. But
can't we say the best way to support troops is to not send them to things that kill them for no reason? Maybe that's the best show of respect.
Yes, but there's also there is this misnomer that we have to spend $1 trillion on the military every year. Maybe we need to spend 350 billion, and that may be too much. But I'm using it as an example because so much of the money is basically there to enrich war profiteers. Yeah. Am I wrong about that, Danny? Can you elaborate on that?
I would love to. Okay, like it's hard to even know where to start in this. I mean, I'm gonna allow myself an emotive moment.
That's cool.
In Afghanistan, 3 of my soldiers bled to death waiting for or on a helicopter. All 3 of them had neither of their legs. One of them also didn't have one of their arms. Bled to death waiting to get a medevaced out. None of those 3 soldiers, Nick Hensley, Gustavo Rios, Chaz Ray Clark, none of those 3 soldiers made more than $40,000 for that year. And that was with special combat pay and not paying taxes. Let's then look at the compensation for even upper or middle management at Raytheon and Lockheed and the other contractors, or even the mercenaries that got sent over there for a few $100,000 a year to guard the gas station that cost $500,000 but was $25 million in profit. That's an obscenity. That's an obscenity that doesn't get enough attention. I often say on Veterans Day, I'll write in articles, if you want to support veterans, create less of us. That's one thing. And then the last thing I think is, important about the trade-offs. You said, I said the last bipartisan enterprise is war. Actually, I'm wrong. One of the last bipartisan enterprises is the defense budget. And the thing about the defense budget is it's confusing to me the way the universe is. I don't particularly have a science brain. I have a little bit more of a liberal arts, social sciences brain. And to this day, fairly smart guy, I can't get my head around the concept of the fact that the universe is always expanding. I don't know about you, but I'm like, expanding to where? How is it? Like, where does it go to? And maybe that's just my ignorance. But the only other thing in American public life that feels like that is the defense budget. It's always expanding. It's never really contracting in any meaningful way. And I think that we don't talk about the opportunity costs and the trade-offs that are involved in that. We think that because there's no draft and because there's no direct war tax, that war is an abstraction. Hey, now we mostly do with drones. There's not a lot of body bags coming home.
Right.
It's invisible to us. But actually, war is a kitchen table issue. And I've been trying to say this for a while to anybody who will listen. And one of the ways is all that money that's spent on defense, 50% of our discretionary budget essentially, could be used for a whole lot of other things. Tax cuts if you're a libertarian, or in my case, maybe just a little bit of social services so we can be an actual modern society. Which brings me to advertising. You know, the Department of Defense spends millions and millions of dollars getting corporate advertising consultants to tell them what slogan will get kids to put themselves in the hook for killing and dying potentially on behalf of their country. And they come up with these great slogans, Army of One. If you're a little older like me, you remember, be all that you can be. It even had a jingle.
Okay, I'm older than you, I assure you.
I have a pitch, everybody, and like, remember I said this, maybe it's my one gem that I'll leave behind. The Department of Defense needs a real, true advertising slogan, and should be this: the Pentagon, this is why we can't have nice things. And I think it gets to that trade-offs of what the defense budget is.
Yeah, I think that's great. We talk about it all the time because whenever we talk about things like Medicare for all or rebuilding our infrastructure or increasing minimum wage or UBI, we always get that, how are you going to pay for it? And I really just started saying, we're going to get the money from the same place the military does. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get, that's going to be our source of money. And so there, because you don't ask it about that. Nobody asks how you're going to pay for that. And I just think at this point, we need to stop falling for it. We talk a lot about modern monetary theory on this show. And that the truth is we can have everything that we want to have. We really can. And the only reason we don't is because people profit from us not having everything that we can have. So yeah, I find that incredibly frustrating that the military gets that. But one thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something I think about a lot with veterans who are kind of what we call woke and really kind of understand they're not just like, oorah, go, kill everybody overseas. And how do you reconcile being in the military, serving your country? And clearly, I think to me, it's a very important thing. I wish it wasn't abused and misused. How do you reconcile that with, I'm sure, a lot of peers and people that you're around that are very go red, white, and blue?
It is a difficult. So I was not like a courageous whistleblower in the vein of a Daniel Ellsberg or even in a Chelsea Manning. But I did begin to write publicly, published my first book, and then a couple of hundred articles that were overtly anti-war while I was on active duty as a captain and then really as a major at the end of my career. This is not done traditionally. And I don't mean that to sound self-aggrandizing. It's just factually true. I mean, I went to West Point. I served in 2 wars. I had taught at West Point. And then, so on paper, I was kind of one of their like golden boys to a certain extent. I was, on the upper climbing path. It is a difficult thing to do because you're scared that they'll take your pension, they'll get in trouble. I was under an investigation where I could have lost my pension in retirement. Instead, they like offered me like kind of an off-ramp because they didn't want to martyr me, I think. So I was very lucky, right? I wasn't courageous in any way. But one of the main reasons it's hard, in kind of an answer to that question, is, you're giving up your identity within the tribe. The military, with the draft going away, became an uber professionalized entity. We've become almost like a Praetorian Guard. I mean, less than 1% are serving on active duty. It's become a family business. In the combat units, especially, like in the infantry and the special forces and the recon elements, like the cav, like I was in, they don't look like America. My units, and this is statistically true, are disproportionately to the extreme white male from the deep south, mountain west, or the Rust Belt, and have a family member in the military. If you pull a black ball soldier out of an infantry unit, that's what he did. So what the problem with this is that it becomes a subculture, an identity, a tribe. We all need that. We need a sense of belonging. And so when you speak out, when you follow your conscience in any sort of public way, you're risking all that. And I'll tell you, it was emotionally trying for me. My best friend stuck with me. I will say this, among my core group of a few hundred veterans that I served with, that I was close with, that are in my phone, right, that I text, I would say about 40% of them, this is vague, are hardcore red, white, and blue, angry at all brown people and Muslims, and still all in. 50% of them would never talk about victory and think this was all kind of a farce, but they're pros. They're either pro soldiers or they're just like, they're out now, but they're apathetic. They're fatalistic about it. And I don't blame them. There's almost like a nihilism to it, like professional mercenary nihilism. And I say this about people I love, where it's like, I just don't have the emotional energy to speak about this. And then there's really only about 10% that will kind of advocate or speak out for peace. But I think the interesting thing about that statistic, and admittedly it's anecdotal for me, but I think it's a pretty decent sample size, is a large percentage of the veterans of the post 9/11 wars do not believe in them in any real sense. They may not have the woke language, they may not have the sophisticated analysis, but they do know this. And this applies to my soldiers who are Trump supporters, which is most of my enlisted soldiers. They have a vague sense that, like, this was stupid. And that's interesting, because when you look at the Afghanistan war, this has to be the first time in American history this is true. 73% of veterans of the Afghanistan war in a 2020 poll were for full withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a slightly higher rate than the civilian population. So to be clear, America's warriors were more anti-war than America's civilians in the case of Afghanistan. I can't think of another historical example, and I just wrote a book on the history of the United States. Maybe someone will find it, but I can't think of one. That is a strange thing indeed, and I think it points to a really unhealthy civil-military relationship. And you brought up the draft as, I think, one of the important reasons that has become the case.
Yeah.
You know, one of the issues that I have taken very strongly with our Congresswoman, who Jen ran against, is the fact that she is as big of a war hawk as anybody you're ever going to find. You know, you do know who Jen ran against, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, you know, Wasserman Schultz is somebody who has always had ambitions of grandeur to get to the top of the mountain, whatever the hell
she was planning on being Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State. How do you like that? How would that have gone over?
Got pretty close. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, she obviously did everything that she was told. She did everything she was told to do in order to get there. You know, she kneecapped Bernie and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, you know, there are a lot of people who want to harp on that particular part of her story. But to me, her story is much more sinister, because she's one of the people at the forefront of trying to flip the regime in Venezuela. She is somebody who has advocated for war with Iran. They're based, you know, again, one would say, well, what does a congresswoman in South Florida have to do with that? And I would just tell people that everything in politics is very easy to understand if you're willing to be open-minded and objective. Corporate special interest money is what defines our politics in the United States. Yep. And the amount of money that she has taken, in particular, from Raytheon, Honeywell, and General Dynamics, and if you don't know what they do, I advise you to look into it. This is done for a reason. And the way I put it is, she's open for business. If you're a politician who is open for business, you are going to get money from the most nefarious industries in the country, and they will have you do what they tell you to do. And she is more than willing and more than capable of doing exactly what they want. And she has, again, when we talk about war criminals, I believe she's a war criminal, because she will advocate for people to go and die over nothing but corporate special interests. And I think we are coming to a consensus that needs to grow larger in this country, that if your representative takes money from the military-industrial complex, they need to be publicly shamed for it. They need to be called out for it all the time, because they are nothing but mouthpieces for these major corporations. Raytheon is probably the most powerful, along with Boeing and Lockheed Martin, but you can make multiple arguments for any of these major corporations that their sole interest is war profiteering. They may do some things that are beneficial to society, and that's the PR work that they do. What do you mean? I don't
see it.
No,
what did he do?
Boeing builds airplanes, Honeywell builds home appliances. My point is,
okay, we have enough of those.
My point is that they would use their PR machine to basically say, oh, but we do a lot of great things. First and foremost, your objective is to make as much money as possible, and war profiteering is where it comes from. And so the more we can put this at the forefront in terms of where we stand when it comes to our politicians, if you take corporate special interest money, and especially if you take it from the military-industrial complex, everyone needs to know this, and they need to be publicly shamed for it, because they have a lot of blood on their hands, and they're going to keep having it until we have a consensus that all war is bullshit and we need to work together, regardless if you are the most hippity-dippity left supporter or you're the most right-wing Trump supporter. You have to find common interests when it comes to this signature issue. And not only that, but we could even talk about the fact that the military-industrial complex is as responsible for our carbon footprint destroying this planet and putting us at the brink when it comes to climate change. There's a lot of places we can go, but to me, that is as important as anything. That is where I hold my ire, not just for Debbie, but for anybody who serves in Congress who, let's face it, pretty much every one of them is a chicken hawk, and they would never in a million years bear arms to defend our country, or especially send one of their children off to do it for them.
It's an interesting thing. In a lot of situations, I mean, they don't really follow it, but, you know, if Mark Esper or, you know, Lloyd Austin, who both work for Raytheon. Now, Mark Esper under Trump, the Secretary of Defense, I mean, he was like a lobbyist for Raytheon. I mean, he wasn't just sitting on the board, which is already obscene, but he was like a lobbyist for years. And so technically he didn't really, and he wouldn't totally commit to it. And like Liz Warren, like nailed him on it. It was like one of her great moments. You know, I was like, watch that stuff to fall asleep at night because I'm a hyper geek. Like just watching her take down some like corporate entity is like, that's what gives me joy. But they have to like recuse themselves from, you know, any contracts that involve Raytheon. I think that policy should apply to Congress people. When the vote for the war comes up, Debbie Wasserman Schultz probably has to sit it out and say, sorry, I'm sitting this out because I profit from the war that I could potentially approve. And no one ever calls for that. So I agree with you. It's public shaming. Stand outside of their office with a sign. If they take money from Raytheon, hold up a sign that has what my like cut off t-shirt that I got from Massachusetts Peace Action says that I wear that's off-putting in Walmart that says, you know, Raytheon bombs kill Yemeni children. You know, like hold that up. So public shame them, force them to recuse themselves and say why. I mean, this is really nasty stuff. And we don't talk about it enough. You know, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is a great example. Here's the deal. I often say, people say, well, why isn't there more activism in the streets? I'm like, well, part of it is because like anti-war activism, because there's no draft. People don't have skin in the game. There's another reason. There's no money in peace. There's no money. I mean, you've got people like Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's, who, full disclosure, like I work with. I have a relationship with, co-founding the Eisenhower Media Network, which is an anti-war.
Half-baked is my favorite one.
Nobody asked you about ice cream.
You know, I mean, he's got hundreds of millions of dollars. The people for war have billions, and you know, the people don't understand the difference between that amount of money, right? It's a ludicrous thing. There's no money in peace. There's no profit in peace. And so if you want to be Secretary of State, if you want to be president someday, and you're waiting in the wings in Congress, because that answers your question that you kind of posed hypothetically, like why does like a representative in Florida, you know, have such a pro-war view? It's like, well, if they're ambitious, then there's never been much political point scoring in being anti-war. Like the best thing to be is to appear to be a patriot, not have anything that the Republicans can throw like mud at you and say that you're weak on defense and all this weird, strange, like sexualized language we use. It's always like soft on communism. There's like a lot of academic writing on this, by the way. But the best thing to do is to avoid that. I mean, Hillary Clinton did the same thing. I mean, that vote for the Iraq war is a vote to be president someday. She's hedging her bet largely. And of course, they know if I run for president, I'm going to need to be like financed at like high levels, and where some of the best money come from campaigns. Of course, it comes from the military industrial complex. This is like really important to note. It's one of the most nefarious things that's like underlying our system, and we don't talk about it a lot. Oh, by the way, why would it get into the public narrative if the same corporate media that provides much of our narrative is funded by a lot of the same folks? And if you look at what's in their portfolios, their stock portfolios, it's going to start with, it's going to rhyme with like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, right? And it's not just Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I was on Arnie Arnst's show. She would run for Congress up in New Hampshire, and she was talking about Jeanne Shaheen today, and she was like going off a bit. And I love when Arnie does that. You know, Jeanne Shaheen, who's a
senator from New Hampshire.
Up in New Hampshire, BAE Systems is big up there, and BAE Systems make a lot of money in Afghanistan. And Jeanne Shaheen is like concerned about us leaving Afghanistan. And like I just Googled real quick, and what's on her Facebook is a speech she gives not too long ago where she says, BAE Systems plays an important role in New Hampshire's economy and in support of our national defense, and she appreciates the opportunity to participate in this whatever event. This is across the board. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is one of the worst examples of it, and she's the tip of an iceberg that goes so deep.
Yeah, they've been doing this for a very long time. And I do think that there is an opportunity, to have sort of this anti-war movement. And, one of the best places to kind of wind down the conversation is to obviously bring it right back to where we are right now. Corporate media is going to do anything and everything in their power because there are a lot of very rich and powerful people that want the island of Cuba back in their hands for business interests. And so right now they're trying to use the anti-communist narrative. And don't get me wrong, I don't support communism, but if you're looking at why this is happening in Cuba right now, it's happening for two reasons: the embargo and the sanctions. You want to have a conversation about communism? We can have that after you lift the sanctions and end the embargo. But corporate media is going to go all in to basically say this is an anti-communist movement within Cuba, and that's why this is happening. And why would they do that? Because they have vested interests on that island, and that's it. I wish and I hope more people could start to see that. But as you have so keenly put, that's why they're so powerful, is because corporate media is a mouthpiece for them. And that is what they're doing right now. I just hope that the more we spread this message, the more people become aware. Once you become aware, then you're like, oh, yeah, I know what they're doing. I see what they're doing. It's BS. It's not what they're actually fighting for. It's that they have a vested interest, and this is what they're telling you is what they're fighting for. But if you actually read between the lines, you would see that it's more than what corporate media is telling you.
I couldn't agree more. Look, if you're really anti-communist, history will tell you that one of the best ways to get rid of communism is to let communism run its course, right? I mean, in many ways, like the totalitarian aspects of communism will eat itself, right? They'll say like, oh, the left eats its young. Well, the capital L left definitely does. I mean, not because there's not merits in like aspects of Marxist theory, but because when put in place, any like highly dogmatic ideology tends to destroy itself in an authoritarian way. In fact, one of the best ways to empower the hardliners, whether they're communists or Islamists or in the Islamic Republic of Iran, is to blockade their people, starve their children, and bomb their folks, because then people rally around the flag. So if you really want the Ayatollahs in Iran to get a little more right wing, let's do a little more max pressure Trumpism, right? And I mean, the Democrats have done it too, but he was the worst. It's so counterproductive unless you're profiting from it. Right. And like I said, I mean, I think I have to say this. I don't want to be the veteran guy. I don't want to be the storyteller, personalized, emotional guy. But the American soldiers who we adulate to the point of almost fetishization, right? It's gone too far, if anything. That's probably a whole other conversation, maybe for another appearance, like we talk about. But if you love the American soldiers, remember, if we invade Cuba or Venezuela or all the different wars around the world that we've been engaged in, they're going to get killed, and they're going to kill people and come back with the trauma and the moral injury and maybe not all of their legs. One of my soldiers, Kyle Hockenberry, has only one of his limbs, right? And he's alive. They do that for like $30,000 to $50,000 a year, depending on how senior they are. And the real money is in the people who create the weapons, sell them, lobby Congress. It's a big pyramid scheme. It's a system that they're all in, and they lobby for more of it, and they don't get questioned. And so my last point on this is this. What's required, I think, and my second book was about this, Patriotic Dissent, is to reframe what patriotism is. Take the narrative from the Hawks. Like, listen, like, look, there are other veterans like me. It's not just me. There are lots of us, actually. The thing is, patriotism is not just being pro whatever your country is doing. True patriotism is questioning it and hoping that we get to the aspirational republic we want to be. And if we see the narrative that patriotism is militarism, that patriotism is camouflage and it is bombs, if we let them have that, then we're always going to be on the defensive in the Democratic Party, worried about looking weak. We're going to have a bunch of Harry Trumans, and we have to get away from that. The true patriotism is not militarism. They are not the same, and we need to just totally uncouple them. And I've been yelling about this, and maybe I'm dead.
No, but one of the things you said, and this was in the very beginning, and I know it wasn't your quote, but dissent is not disloyalty. And I think that is a really huge thing for people to understand. I've always felt that, I've always been dissenting. I think I've just always been in dissension. But But yeah, and I've always thought, why could someone else tell me I'm not patriotic just because of, like, why does someone else get to own that narrative? And I've always thought that that's a bunch of crap. So I'm glad that you said that. But as we're wrapping up, like, if there's anything, like, Peter, what do you have to wrap with? Oh,
well, I just want to say thank you. I know it's a cliche, and I know you hear it more times than you need to hear it, because a lot of it's empty. A lot of it's just to say thank you for doing something that I didn't have the balls to do. It's quite frankly what a lot of people are saying. And that's no disrespect, but it's the truth. Because most people don't have the balls to actually defend somebody or something and die for it. Because most people are cowards. And that's an unfortunate byproduct of the world that we live in. There's a lot of jealousy and inadequacy that comes from representatives like Lindsey Graham, who never met a war that he didn't love and wouldn't want to send somebody off to die for because he's a coward and would never serve our country. And that's something that never gets talked about enough. But I do think there are a lot of people who are evolving, especially the millennial and Gen Z generations. There is this, there is this rejection of war and wanting to move away from it. Unfortunately, we don't have the levers of power, at least not yet. But I do think that we are heading in that direction. It may not be as quickly as we'd like it to be. But
we're heading in the direction of Space Force. But I wanted to just pull this question up because somebody wanted me to ask you about talking with Oliver Stone.
And let's be honest, we would love to get Oliver Stone on our podcast.
But they want to know what you think about the new Space Force.
Well, I mean, I think it's about as ridiculous as the Steve Carell movie of the same name. I mean, there were treaties that said we wouldn't militarize space, like that.
Yeah.
We signed these treaties, but we didn't really believe in them. I'll tell you this: let's worry about Earth first. Let's demilitarize Earth before we start militarizing the solar system. Because there are only two existential threats to America and the species, and neither of them is terrorism, everybody. And they are this. Nuclear catastrophes will probably be some sort of mistake and miscalculation because of saber rattling. And the second one is climate change. Both of those things, by the way, avoiding extinction and making sure that great-grandchildren is still a thing, both of those things require cooperation and just, dealing with people we don't like and coexisting, which is why I think peace is not naive. Peace is the only rational way forward. And I think therefore the Space Force is ludicrous, because the idea of militarizing this while we're on the brink of extinction on our planet. And oh, by the way, all the knowledge needed to save the world from climate change and nuclear catastrophe is in your phone, in your pocket. And sorry to be a little bit provocative, but the problem is most of us are too busy trolling our exes on Facebook with those things to actually read about the things we need to. I think I'm so thankful for some of the things you guys brought up and the topics that we raised.
I can talk to you for hours. We could talk about something we don't really have time to get into about militarization at home. How it corresponds abroad.
Yeah, I think we should have a military panel at some point. I think that would definitely be a good idea. And I think
let's talk about Oliver Stone. Shoot me a line, and maybe we can put together some sort of anti-war veterans small panel.
Oh, 1,000%.
Oh,
again, amazingly, I think he's one of the finest directors we've ever had, and I still haven't seen his magnum opus. I still have not seen Platoon, and that's my fault. It's.
I know you're doing tonight, but it's not important enough not to watch Platoon. I'm just going to.
Well, and I agree 1,000%, because Wall Street and JFK are two of my all-time.
The more important thing is the untold history that he did, the series, which was really great.
But Platoon is basically his autobiography of his time serving in 1968 in Vietnam, and so the importance of that story and. It was lauded, particularly as I remember, by Siskel and Ebert, because no one had ever done a movie truly depicting. I mean, I thought First Blood and the job that Stallone did was excellent in terms of
First Blood was really good. I've got to say,
post-traumatic stress disorder, but no one had actually. You can make arguments. I mean, I think Apocalypse Now is a very good movie, but everyone always says that if you want to know what it really was like to be in the jungle, you have to watch Platoon, because that really really cuts to the core of what really went on in terms of the genocide, in terms of the PTSD, everything that came together. And again, it's my fault. I mean, I just haven't done it. And it's not that I'm avoiding
I'll put it on your list.
I can handle it. Yeah, put it on the list.
I'll just one kind of an out about veterans, like an outro maybe, that you kind of threw without meaning to. At the end of Platoon, the Charlie Sheen character, who's based on Oliver Stone, is wounded and he's flying away, and Oliver Stone really was wounded. And he gives like this monologue soliloquy, and he says, "The war is over for me now, but it'll always be there for the rest of my days." ... He says, "But for those of us who did make it, we have the obligation to build again, to teach to others what we know, and to try what's left of our lives to find a goodness and a meaning in this life." And I hope that more veterans of my generation, they're starting to stand up, will be that voice. We're not the leadership. We can't run the movement, but I hope we can lend our voice and whatever credibility we have and try to find a goodness and a meaning in this world that's not militaristic.
That's awesome. That's perfect.
For your
Don't
service.
do that if you're not in the service. Stop doing stuff like that.
Don't salute a soldier if he's served. You can still do that. I may not have been a soldier, but you better believe if I was. I mean, look, I don't like rehashing the past, but it's something that it eats at me. I had signed the letter for the Army after 9/11. I didn't go. I've lost some friends. It's a very personal issue for me. It's not something that goes away. It just doesn't. And in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't go, because I would have been fighting for something that I thought I was fighting for, and in reality, it wasn't anything.
Correct.
To that. And that is the message that has to be sent out. And one of the best guests, Danny, if you have an opportunity to check out our podcast, I highly recommend you check out the podcast we did with Isaiah James. He is a friend. He was on Jen Slate. He is running for Congress in New York's 9th district. He's a veteran, and he talks about the fact that I'm a veteran because I couldn't do anything else. That was
the jobs program in his poor black neighborhood. So that's what he got me out of it.
This is what got me out of the hood.
Yeah.
I was able to go into the service, and he would admit that was there when I almost left to go to the Middle East. So yeah, it is what it is. But like I said, it's not an easy topic to talk about.
No.
But my God, do I have fire in the belly when it comes to it, Danny? And like I said, I thank you. For your guts, because most people don't have it.
No, I thank you for writing this book, and I think it's important, and I think that it's the kind of thing that everybody should read. So let's put that back up. Get that back. Everybody check this out. And I always say this, I do Audible. I know it's kind of cheating. I'm like, what did I do today? Well, I'd like to say reading, but it's really just listening. But I think it's really important, people, when it's Audible, that's nonfiction and it's done, narrated by the author, it's exceptionally good. You're essentially getting a private lecture, which for me, it's the best. I really only like it for nonfiction, but I highly recommend it. Danny, thank you so much for coming on. Like, I'm very happy to meet you. And I was I've been listening to you for like 25 hours. So, I appreciate you coming on so much. Thank you.
Same here, brother.
Well, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And without, fawning over the host, I'll just say this, like, there are different kinds of veterans. And, Norman Mailer wrote a book called Armies of the Night about opposing the Vietnam War and marching on the Pentagon. And I really think that the work that you're doing and even bringing up these issues and advocating against them, that is going to end up being more of a service to the country than any machine gun holding soldier can be. And so this is important. And I'm so glad.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. We'll do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, soldier. Have a great evening. Well, I mean, what can you say? Definitely.
Well, you really need to read this or listen to it. I will. You would love it. You're such a history geek. You would so love it.
Once you can see how things are done, that's what I just try to tell people. We're not that different. Most of the things that separate us are there is this culture of fear. And look, the GOP does it much better than the Dems do. But the GOP has this culture of fear that they hold over people that have worked for a very long time. One of the congressional candidates, probably the most outlandish, kookiest GOP candidate running for Congress in our state is Anthony Sabatini, and he's running just a little bit north of where Jesse Philippe is running.
So
No,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
He put out a message a little earlier basically saying that we not only stand with the Cuban people, but that the people in charge of the Cuban government need to be tried and executed.
Oh, good God.
And I mean, this guy's running for Congress.
Well, that's not surprising. So listen, we've got some more stuff, you guys. We have a story time.
Yes, we do.
And I'm very excited about this. Peter's going to read it. He hasn't read it before, so it's going to be like he's reading a brand new story. Okay, first show the cover.
I think we have to preface it with the image. So for those of you who don't know, Dean Trantillis is the mayor of Fort Lauderdale. Look, he's a nice fella, but he's very much in the establishment 1,000 times over.
So talk about this story that comes out about this little agreement between Elon Musk.
You know what? You can do the story as far as I'm concerned. You want to do it? Go right ahead.
Go ahead.
You're cutting me off. You don't let me finish what I was saying. So anyway, we have a mayor in Fort Lauderdale who answers to corporate special interests. He answers to Debbie. He answers to all of them. And in this case, you have Elon Musk, who wants to build an underground tunnel in South Florida.
By the way, we're at sea level, people.
We're at sea level. You got shit coming out of pipes.
We can't. They have such an infrastructure problem in Fort Lauderdale that when there's a heavy rain, there's sewage in the streets. So this book is called Tunnel of Love and River of Sludge. And that's Mayor Trantillis right there with his buddy Elon Musk.
And all you have to know, anyone who says, why would Mayor Trantillis do this and put so many people in harm's way with this underground tunnel? And listen, if enough attention is put to it, it's probably not going to go through. But even if there was a chance that it could, and you think about how many people would be adversely affected by it, why would he do this?
Well, so
there's one reason. Why would he do it?
Money.
Corporate special interests.
So they're wanting the plan. The idea of the tunnel is that they would have these little like pods that would at super speed bring people from downtown Fort Lauderdale to the beach. Okay, like this an underground transportation to bring.
If that doesn't reek of I'm a rich person and I just want to throw money at something because that's just what I want and that's what I'm going to do, could not think of a more vain thing, because let's face it.
So read the story. So that's part of the story.
Once upon a time, there was a megalomaniacal oligarch that wanted another way to waste inordinate sums of money. Looks like he missed the space race. There was also a feckless mayor of a city by the sea that was looking for a useless project or a way to line his pockets. Even though his city was at sea level and suffered from a crumbling infrastructure, it really is crumbling, wherein sewage ruled the streets, he was more interested in a photo op with the oligarch and its great photography. They decided to build an unnecessary tunnel, even though billions of dollars are needed to save the citizens of the city by the sea, and you'll need billions more after you build that tunnel. The end.
Did you like that? Did you like my story?
His company is called The Boring Company. I mean, that's one hell of a name, let me tell you.
They're boring
Company. Yeah, it's boring. Yeah,
And yeah, I did hear about the special tunnel that he built basically just for himself. And that's just great and all. But especially given that a building in Surfside just crumbled into the ocean, the fact that they're talking about doing
for worst PR right now, Dean, with all due respect.
I just don't understand. First of all, when you're a city that literally has sewage coming up to the streets when it rains, you've got a real infrastructure problem. where do you get off worrying about building a tunnel to transport people from downtown to the beach? And they're doing it like they're going to be promoting beach living. Hello,
Jill,
Dean. Your buildings are going to be crumbling into the ocean.
Seriously, Jill, if you're still here, I mean, you can even write in the chat about your experience living in Fort Lauderdale and the issues that one would experience.
Who is that? Who did you know? Who's that?
My friend Jill is here. She lives up. She's my friend from Boston. She lives in Worcester, and she's a Republican, but it's all good. So. When she lived in Fort Lauderdale, I can only imagine that there were various issues in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the water, just various things. It never ceases to amaze me, though, that despite what just happened in Surfside, that you're going to get involved with this?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The timing is really bad. And, everybody in Fort Lauderdale is forever complaining about crumbling infrastructure. So the fact that this is what he's jumping onto is just so absurd, people. It might as well be a Space Force.
And it's going to be so interesting to see what his political ambition is, because his district is Ted Deutsch's district. And I don't see him ever lifting a finger to challenge power. So I wonder if he is just going to sit around hoping that there's something that opens up for him, or if he's going to, maybe he tries to run to go to Tallahassee. I mean, you never know what he's going to do, but it's just, it's dirty.
He's feckless.
It's dirty. He's like I said,
he is.
He's not a jerk, but
he's just feckless. He's just
going to do what he's going to do because the money's good and it's going to offer him other opportunities in other areas. And
maybe he'll turn out being a nice lobbyist for the Boring Company.
Look at what happened with Tom Perez. He's the top. He takes Debbie Wasserman Schultz's position. He parlays it into one of the biggest anti-union busting law firms. And now he's running for governor of Maryland.
Tom Perez is running for governor?
He is.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, Larry Hogan ain't losing. Unless he's termed out, I don't know what the laws are.
Perez has no personality. I'm sorry. I don't see him winning any sort of elected position.
Here are the facts. I'm going to run for governor of Maryland.
Has he won? What is his background? Does he have an elected office that he's won?
Yeah, I was elected to the DNC chair.
That doesn't count. So he's not electable by regular people, is my point.
I was the labor secretary for Obama.
Okay, that's not an elected position.
No, but it's a position. Here are the facts.
No, now you're getting into Biden. All right, so I think that's it. I did put a pollinator, but I don't really have the energy for going into pollination.
You put a pollinator in there?
I did put a pollinator in there.
Oh, okay. Well, this is nice.
We could end with this.
Jen's been having a lot of fun in Countryland.
I am, and for people who don't know, guys, I have been staying for the past 3 weeks. I'm in a trailer on a cannabis farm. It's basically like the mothership, and it's been really cool. So, I've been really liking it.
Well,
but this little beauty I came across today.
No, that's great. And again, if the bees go, we all go. So protect the bees, bee colonies. These things are absolutely essential. Save the bees. You must save the bees. And that's why the environmental movement is so very important. So on Thursday, we have
what do we have Thursday?
Got a lot of things going on Thursday, obviously.
Thursday's going to be an interesting show. It's not going to be typical. We're breaking it up a little differently. So,
Well, we've already got a great story about Katie Porter we'll be talking about. The lady just has so many badass moments. And that's testament to just her being.
I'm just talking guests on Thursday.
Well, first we have Rebecca Parson. She is a former slate mate of Jen's with Brand New Congress.
Yeah, guys.
Just got endorsed again by Brand New Congress today.
Rebecca's great. She's out in Washington, and she's
running against Eric Clymer, one of the most feckless congressional representatives we have. Total corporatist, and definitely very much looking forward to having Rebecca on. She's definitely got a quiet confidence about her that is.
She's very cool.
Yes. After that, we are going to be talking about the blueprint. We've been discussing it for a while. The blueprint to follow if you want to take over state party. And let me just reiterate, I have all the respect for anybody who fights for the Greens or the Libertarians or the movement for a People's Party. But let's be honest. with our current political infrastructure, there are two parties. And if you want to enact any type of change, it has to be within that current infrastructure.
When you're talking about within the electoral system, within
Correct.
the electoral politics,
Correct.
if you're not, it just is the way it is, people. It just is.
But
So
with that
who's
said,
coming?
we are going to be speaking with Jacob Allen, who is the VP of the Nevada Dems, who works directly with Judith Whitmer, the whole crew. He's going to come on and fill us in about the blueprint that Nevada followed with the non-corporate Democrats to take over the state party, and how you could do it too. And
Right.
so
And that's really what we're trying to do in Florida. And then we have then we have a third guest that's coming on for a fun update.
And a
Yes.
final guest, which will be Kevin Gostola, friend of the show, writer for Shadow Proof, a real journalist.
Yes.
Real journalist.
And the
And he
head
will be
of his, what's the name of the organization? I forget.
Shadow Proof.
No.
Oh.
The defense for, it's Assange Defense Org. Is it Assange Defense Fund or Assange Defense? He runs a group called Assange Defense Org. Kevin's going to be coming on, guys, and giving us an update on what's going on with Julian. As we know, the witness that they were banking on for their ridiculous case against Julian has retracted this statement. And so we're going to get an update from Kevin, like where we stand right now with Julian's case.
Yes, it's definitely going to be informative and very important that we cover it. And obviously there will be plenty of stories. I'm sure we'll get a nice bootlicker. There always is one.
Oh, there's no shortage of bootlickers.
And then next week, obviously Jen is going to be back, and we're going to have a couple of the following week is going to be very big, because on Monday we are going to have Gustavo Rivera, the state senator from New York, who is responsible for the New York Health Act bill. So we're going to have a lot to cover there. And we are also going to be speaking with Sam Cedar of the Majority Report. And then on Thursday, we are doing our Medicare for All Summit. And we have a lot of exciting guests obviously lined up. We want to highlight what is happening on Saturday. Look, bottom line,
I am almost close to firming up my third person for my 7 p.m. panel. So I'm working it.
Well, you're ahead of you're way ahead of it than I am. I'm working my butt off. So guys, on the 22nd, we will be having a healthcare summit as well. So really, that's going to be a very healthcare heavy week, which is fine. There is going to be the day of national actions on the 24th. Never a shortage not to talk about it, especially because they are doing the marches. And I think it's important to just highlight this. And again, there are people involved with the marches that we don't agree with. But you know what we do agree with? We agree with Medicare for all.
Exactly.
And that's what matters. And that's what matters. And
so our panels, do we want to talk about what we're having like on the 22nd as panels?
Well, as of right now, we have our first panel, which is going to be about economics, the economics of Medicare for all. Wendell Potter will be one of our guests. We are still figuring out who the rest are going to be at the moment. The second panel is going to focus on communities of color, in particular.
Stop saying that. I hate that. I hate that. It's not. We're talking about Black communities and healthcare.
Black communities and healthcare.
Yes. I hate the term people of color. I hate it. It's just, it's got to go away.
Okay,
so,
fine.
So we are going to be the middle panel is going to be about healthcare in the Black community. There are a lot of different issues that need to be addressed, that need to be talked about, that are often overlooked. So we have a panel on that. And then our last panel is going to be about really the political action and what's really necessary to put forth Medicare for all. And that is going to be, we're going to have Marianne Williamson is going to be on. And I think we're going to see about getting Kashama Sawant. I know that's something I'd love to.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to work schedule-wise, but we'll keep trekking along. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll fill it up good. But guys, be on the lookout. So we're going to have a really good week talking about healthcare.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to do, obviously, guys, and we appreciate the support as always. One more time, it is very important, as you guys all know. The only way this channel grows is if we continue to build our base of support through Patreon and other means. But as of right now, that is the one that is working.
Can you put the thing up? Will you put the thing? Yeah.
Remember, anybody who signs up gets one of these babies right here.
If you sign up, $5 or $10 Patreons get the Lulu sticker with their gift. $5 Patreons get the hemp hemp bracelet, custom hemp bracelet, which we should keep one near so you could show it.
Jill, come on, become a $10 Patreon so that I can send you one of these T-shirts.
If you're a $10 Patreon, you're going to get the shirt. We are going to be making these shirts for Gen Change as well, so people actually can have a choice if you want the purple T-shirt or the white jersey. But if you're a $10 Patreon, you're going to get a shirt. We really need the support, guys, because we are being suppressed. And just us covering topics like we covered today makes us get suppressed. When we talk about certain things, we get suppressed.
And again, we're not the only ones talking about it. It's actually people are coming to us and saying, hey, how come I'm not seeing anything about your channel? Because we're suppressed. That's why.
Right. So if you want to help, be a Patreon. It really helps us out. But we appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. This was a good show. I was really happy to talk to him. I've been listening to him for like 3 days.
I think it was great. And okay. Jill, that's great. But we still want you to become a Patreon. So if you can go right here, patreon.com/generational change, $10 a month. Mwah. Love you. Would really appreciate it. Guys, we'll see you Thursday.
Peace out.